Okay, we are live on Facebook, and I am here now with Michael Soskil, who I've known now for a number of years. We've been friends for quite a while, right from the very start of trying to reinvent education or change education. And we had the wonderful opportunity of meeting together and working together in Kenya, which was amazing. Michael, welcome, and it's such a pleasure to chat with you again, and
Well,
to
thank you.
look at where we are now from where we were, and the progress. There is progress. We are changing education for learning and learners, but COVID is opening up some whole new possibilities as well for us. So let's just talk a little bit about you and let people know a little bit about who you are, because I know who you are.
Sure. So I am I'm a fourth and fifth grade STEM teacher in northeastern Pennsylvania. I teach in a rural community that has some economic challenges, like a lot of other areas. There's not a whole lot of diversity in my small town, and so the education that I've tried to provide my students, I've really tried to use technology in ways that open up the world to them and expose them to people who are different, that have different ideas, that come from different cultures, so that they can understand their place in the global community that we live in, that is getting smaller, by the day.
Very, very smaller by the day, as we've noticed. So, you were named one of the top 10 global teachers, and how was that experience for you, having the opportunity to meet other, you know, thinkers like you that are moving education forward? What was that like?
Sure. So of course, being able to collaborate with some of the best teachers in the world was an amazing experience. It still is. We have a thriving community of Global Teacher Prize alumni that still collaborate and talk about education, how we can move things forward. But the other piece of that was really special was being able to have a platform to advocate for what I know is right in education. So many of us that are teachers have great ideas, but we often teach in isolation, and those great ideas don't get spread. And so being able to not only have a network that allowed myself to grow professionally and personally, but also to have a platform to share what I know worked for students with others. That was really a huge benefit. And I've seen through those collaborations, I've seen some great things happen for kids around the world.
So you say share what I know works with learners. Let's look
Yeah.
at let's look at, we've made the growth, and as we had been talking earlier about Steve Sherman's statement about the year 2020 is the year to be able to see our vision of what learning and education should look like in a global sense. What should it look like? What should it look
Yeah.
like?
So I think 2020 provides great context, because I think COVID has not only created amazing opportunities in education, but it has also exposed what's wrong. It's exposed equity gaps. It's exposed the differences between the haves and have-nots, both in American society and also around the world. We know that there are self-driving cars in Pittsburgh. I gave a keynote in Treacle, Greece, a couple of months ago, where they had self-driving buses. There's amazing technology out there, and 16% of the world still lives without electricity. And so as technology is exploding, we know the gaps between those two groups are widening. And that's really been exposed during COVID. And so, these tools that we have that are creating the gaps are also the same tools that can be used to close them. And so within education, once children have the opportunity to meet those who are different and to learn from each other, they're inevitably going to see the realities of the world. They're going to see those inequities. And allowing them to take ownership over their learning, allowing them to have agency and autonomy, and allowing them to identify and use learning to try and mitigate some of the problems that they see in their local and global communities is absolutely key, because that's what gives us self-worth. That's what allows us to know that we matter, is when we're helping others and when we see our place in our community, whether it's global or local. And so education has a role to play in fulfilling that. And creating that sense of purpose and identity in children.
And so education, that's its purpose of education.
I would say that that's part of the purpose. So I really, when I think about the role of education in society, I really think that it's a three-prong. Three things need to be in balance. And actually, this is one of the chapters in the book that I now have currently in production, Flip the System. And I think those three things, to use some technical terms, one piece that we do really well in American education is qualification. We make sure that kids are qualified to do something after school. So that's our college and career readiness. But unfortunately, we put way too much focus on those economic purposes of education, right? We want kids to be trained to go into the workforce, but that's not the only thing that education should be doing.
No, not necessarily training. It should be empowering them to go into the workforce in the place that they want to be going into, that's going to make them happy and sustainable, and yeah.
Sure. So the other two things that need to be in balance that we don't do very well are subjectification, which is helping kids be holistically well and understand who they are as a person, what their passions are, how those passions intersect with the world around them, and then socialization, how they fit into the society that's educating, right? We see this incredible polarization and these tribalism in our politics, and not just in the United States. We see this all around the world. The rise of authoritarianism. And that is really because we have lost the ability to have respectful, nuanced conversations when we disagree, and that is a failure of education at its core, because we don't allow for those conversations in the educational process. And so I really think that when we talk about the purpose of education, those three things, the socialization, subjectification, qualification, those three things have to be in balance in order for education to both serve individuals and also to serve society as a whole.
So now we are talking, and you and I have both traveled and we've both seen, it's always interesting because I don't know about you, but when I've traveled, people have always said, we'd like to have the kind of system that you have in America. And I try to inform them that really it isn't any different. Scale-wise, but it isn't any different. It's a systemic problem that we have throughout the system globally, and in our thinking, that's been created over years and years and centuries of going from home into industrialization and not getting out of that and being stuck into that same thing. And now we're being able to get back into more of the whole thing. And so, what do you want to see if you could define a global education system? You've got the three parts. What do we do? What steps now? What are our steps to make that happen?
Yeah, so I think to start to answer that question, we have to look at where the misperception that you just talked about comes from, right? The misperception that the American education system has it right. And I think that comes from a fundamental misunderstanding that a lot of people have, not just abroad, but here in the United States, that the problems that we see in society come from poverty. And it's just not borne out by data. There's a great book called The Spirit Level that was written by two authors. I don't recall their names right now, but if you do Google search for The Spirit Level, you'll be able to find this. And what they show conclusively in that book is that the things that we associate with being negative aspects of society, things like drug use, violent crime, suicide rates, mental health issues, that those don't correlate with societies that are stuck in poverty. What they do correlate with very, very strongly is societies that are inequitable, where the haves and have-nots are further apart. And so when we look at American society, and I do believe that that education systems, especially public education systems, are microcosms of the societies in which they serve. So when we look at the American system, American education system, it is we are not poor by any means. We per pupil spending, the amount that we spend on education is not below other countries. We put a lot of resources there, but it is incredibly inequitable, and those inequities cause the kinds of societal problems that we see. And so when other countries look at our education system and try and identify and think that it's doing well, it's because they're looking at the affluence and not at the inequity. And so when we then broadcast that to a larger and say, what should global education look like? We need to close those equity gaps. Like I said before, with 16% of the world living without electricity, and other communities living in incredible affluence, we are creating, as our society becomes more and more global, those societal problems that correlate with inequity are going to start being global problems. They already are, but we're going to start see them perpetuate on a larger scale. And so I really think one of the main purposes of education has to be to educate in a way that makes the learner understand not just that there are these equity gaps around the world, but that it is our moral obligation to close them.
And in a sense, you did that not a couple of years ago with our mutual friend Livingstone in Kenya. I was there when he opened his center, and you came in afterwards with your students. You came into them afterwards with your students, and
Yeah.
There was a problem that was created during the time that your kids and their kids were meeting. Can you talk a little bit about that, because that really shows what and how we can close the gaps up in a way.
Yeah. So in the different interactions, so in the last, I want to say 6 or 7 years, students that I've taught in my school have connected with over 96 different countries. We've talked with astronauts on the International Space Station live. We've talked with scientists in Antarctica who are doing research on penguins. And through those different interactions, I've built a culture in my classroom where students look at the learning, they look at their own passions, and they see where those intersect with problems in the world and how they can get involved in solving them. And learning about the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations is part of that. But what happened in this case is that we connected with Livingston and a couple of his students in rural Western Kenya. And we played a game of mystery animal at first, where they chose a lion. I don't know what animal we chose, but our kids tried to play, use yes or no questions to guess the other. But afterwards, Livingston took my students on a tour of his village, and he showed a bridge that was there that was dilapidated and broken down. And he explained to my kids that children who were young, kindergarten, first, second grade age, who lived on one part of the village were not allowed to go to school because the bridge was too dangerous. Their parents wouldn't let them cross. And that during the rainy season, no children, even high school kids, would miss an entire month of schooling because the water was too high and the bridge was dangerous. And my students said some magic words to me then. And I am now attuned to this, to listen for these words, because they're so telling. They said to me, Mr. Soskil, we should do something about that. That's not right. They had recognized the problem, they recognized the inequity, and they also understood how their passions and their learning intersected with it.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was my indication that I needed to drop everything. And instead of looking at the curriculum and finding cool ways to teach it, this was something where my kids told me they were passionate. It was my job as a teacher to build the curriculum into that passion. And so we used the design thinking process, the engineering process. They started with paper. They built bridges to try and find a solution. They tested them with pennies. When the bridges failed, they made them better. Then they built bridges out of cardboard, and they tested them with rocks. And when they failed, they made them better. And finally, they drew up blueprints, and they sent them over to a bridge designer in Kimilili, who told us the bridge would cost about $3,200 to build, the design that we had come up with.
3,200.
And my students were determined. That is not in my rural, economically challenged community. That's more money than we were going to be able to raise in a year. But my students were determined. So they had bake sales, and they sold cupcakes at lunch. We invited people to come watch movies in our community. We couldn't charge for the movie, but the kids sold popcorn. And over the course of the year, they raised about $1,200. But a couple of my fifth graders were really smart and really in tune with what they were doing. And they asked me about halfway through the year if they could build a website sharing what they were doing with others outside our community. And through that website, we were able to bring in an additional $2,500. And so at the end of the school year, I was able to show my students pictures of the bridge that they designed and fundraised for, that bridged those two parts of the community in Mukuyuni, so that children from the entire village could go to school. And while it's a great story for the children in Kenya, the part that I like to share when I tell this story is that because of the challenges in our community and because of some of the home situations, some of my students are lacking hope, and they come to school not really being sure of who they are. At the end of that school year, when they learned about the impact that they had, when they felt the joy of doing good for others, they knew how powerful they were. They knew how much education mattered, and they knew how much they mattered. And that's what I want for every one of my students.
And isn't that what we want for every one of our learners?
That's what education should
Isn't
be.
that what education should look like?
I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
Sorry, and I watched you go through it, and I know the whole situation, and it's still, because it is the give back. And when you're able to take what you've learned and the knowledge that you have and give it back and make something else better, then that's but it's all focused on the testing. It's all focused on the testing and not on its purpose, not on the purpose. And I think, and just to go back, if you look at the differences between the kids and their self-confidence and their understanding of who they, and the power that they have with the knowledge that they're gaining from what they did there versus what do they get from the tests to put out that knowledge. I mean, it's a huge difference. So does it really, do we really question why they get so defeated and they tune out, and why they do drugs and they do science, because society says, be this way. When in fact, if you can be this way, you become better, and so does everyone else become better.
Well, education should be empowering, right? I mean, that should be its purpose.
Be empowering.
And we've lost sight of that, as a society. We've focused too much on the economic benefits of education to our society, rather than the holistic benefits to both society and individuals. And part of that has come, and I can see my book in the background, Teaching in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, that I go with a couple other Global Teacher Prize finalists. But in that, one of the things that we talk about is how technological processing power, as it has grown, and I'm getting a little wonky here, it's allowed us to numbers. We've been able to crunch numbers more, right? And standardized testing came very much out of that thought that if we just have more data, we can do more good things, right? We can do better. But what happens is we use the cheapest, most easily obtained data that can be that's easily fit into a spreadsheet that allows us to rank and sort students, instead of the data that's really important, right? So in any system, and education systems included, if you really want to get to why problems are happening and how you can fix them, you need to get to the lived experiences of those who are suffering from that issue. And in education, that means we can't rely on what fits easily into a spreadsheet. We have to get to the lived experiences of students and understand that if there are equity gaps, if there are problems in society, why are they really occurring? You're not going to see that from a standardized test score. You're not even going to see that from a test grade that the teacher gives. You've got to dig much, much deeper. But those things, of course, those qualitative stories don't, computers can't crunch them. Right. And so this rise of technology has led to us using really poor data, and so many of the most important decisions in education right now are being made based on whether or not kids had breakfast in the morning, right? Because that's what's determining their standardized test scores. It has nothing to do with the reasons that are really causing the issues.
And so going back to how then are we going to be able to allow that to happen? Because it's not through books that they really get to understand what the issues are. And again, we come to the inequities. There are so many of the children that want to learn and want to have, but they don't even have the electricity. They don't have access. How are we going to be able to create this picture of connectivity that's necessary in education to make the changes? How are we going to be able to do that?
Yeah, so there's the macro and there's the micro, right? So at a really large 50,000 foot view, of the American and use feet rather than a metric system, but from that really that airplane view of the system, it's going to take we need governments to realize that they need to invest in education, and that education is before we started recording, we were talking about the Sustainable Development Goals and how all of them, education is the root of all of those, right? It's only one of the 17 goals, but it really is the basis for
It
everything.
really is the center, yes.
So until we as a society, and really that's what governments are, right? Governments are a reflection of society. Until we as a society demand that education be funded in a way that it's able to pay us back and serve society, we're not going to be able to fix some of these issues, right? Education is not something that we do for kids. It's not something that we do for families. It's something that we do for us as humans. And so we have to fund it with that purpose in mind.
But
But
if
in a
they
micro,
say that they're funding it now, that they're funding all of this money that they're putting in now, is it that they're not putting in the money, or that they're not necessarily putting it in appropriate areas or ways?
right. So now we're going down that political route, and I'm happy to go there. So yeah, I mean, the amount of funding is an issue, but also who's controlling the funding and where it's going towards, right? So if that funding is going to education to serve purely economic motives that benefit the haves in society, then of course you're not going to get the outcomes that we're looking for, right? So it has to be done with purpose, and then the question becomes, so who is best at determining that purpose, right? And it can't be entities outside of education that have no educational experience, right? And you and I have had this conversation before, and you know where I stand on this. Teachers can speak for the collective needs of students and understand the intersection of where policy and practice meet in a way that no one else really can. So of course we want parents advocating for their kids because they know their individual students best. Of course we want school administrators having their input, and even the business community should be able to give input. But teachers are the only stakeholders who see how policy and practice intersect for a large group of students and can speak for them collectively. So I do think that teachers have a huge role to play in kind of shaping what the system looks like.
Mm, mm. And of course, I do believe also that the reason the reason that it's all falling on one is because others have dropped out, and that is parents and families. I think they're critically key to success, because you and I both know that so many of them predetermine what their child's going to do and what they're going to be and how they're going to be even before they're born in some countries, and that and having a change in what their thinking is like, and
Yeah.
changing society's thinking about peers and their interactions and blaming bullying on them, when I
Right.
think it's a social disease. So we can't go, my goodness, don't go political, because let's talk about being a bully. Huh? And
Right.
and then
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. At some point, education has to promote common values, right? I mean, if it's funded by society and it is serving society, then it should reflect the values of society. And as long as
but
we
society,
are,
I think, needs to reflect on their values.
yeah, I totally agree, right? So as long as we are not, if we are promoting human decency and education is building that foundation that everybody has value, that we respect our fellow man, that we try and see from other people's perspectives and learn from their perspectives and understand how those perspectives impact their lives, and we have both a sense of empathy and shared humanity at the same time. If we can have education do that, then we're going to start to see a decrease in those outcomes of bullying and marginalization and oppression. That will be a natural outcome of an education system that is rooted in the kinds of things that you and I think that it should be.
Yeah.
But as long as education is driven by financial motives, let's face it, in a capitalistic society, there are winners and losers. And so you're always going to be creating those wedges in society between those two groups if economic means are the only thing you're focused on in education.
And so somehow or another, we have to be able to change that focus from the economics to the more humanitarian, humane understanding of. And I think if people were allowed as children to follow passions and be nurtured. And then as they get into the education system, that continues rather than get stifled, that
Yeah.
that may happen. And how, how, you know, you talk about what you do in your classroom with the kids and all of that. How do we help other teachers? Because many of them are stuck.
Yeah.
We know that, what is it, that within 3 years, really the good teachers, the invested teachers, they leave because they
Yeah.
just can't. And the ones that are there for the money stay. But you know, how can we help raise the level of awareness and their ability to be able to do those things they know have to be done?
Yeah. So there's two different things that are in play here, and one of them is recruitment, and the other one's retention, right? So
I'm sorry,
if
say that again.
yeah, so the two different pieces here are recruitment and retention, right? How are we recruiting teachers? How are we retaining teachers?
And maybe
Um,
how are we training teachers?
right. I think that's part of it, right? But I tell you, as a teacher of the year and as a global teacher finalist, I have spent a lot of time in the past 4 or 5 years speaking with groups of pre-service teachers, kids who are in university training to be teachers. And to a person, every one of them will tell me all of these amazing reasons why they want to teach, because they want to change the world, they want to help kids find themselves, you know, all of the great reasons why, you know, teachers teach. But if you ask the average teacher who's been in the classroom for 5 or 6 years, so what are you doing this week? They're going to talk to you about how they're preparing for a unit test, or how they're getting ready for the state standardized test, or, you know, all of these things that have nothing to do with that purpose that they chose to teach for. And so we have to reconnect those things. We have to move away from assessment and measurement of students and move towards the two things that are lacking: that socialization, subjectification, the holistic well-being of children. And that has to be done individually. Teachers need to make that switch in their own practice, but we need a system that supports that. And those two things have to happen at the same time. And as much as I think that we need to do a much better job of teaching, of treating teachers as professionals, I also think that there is a responsibility of teachers to step into professional spaces and to demand the kind of changes in the system that we need for children. We have not, you know, I will own it as a teacher, we have not done a great job of that as a profession, of saying this is wrong. This system is forcing me to do harm to my students, and
Yeah.
that is the case.
And what happens is those teachers that feel that way, they leave, don't they? They leave.
I think they leave or they become incredibly disenfranchised. I think one of those two things happens. We do see a huge rate of teachers that are leaving the profession, but there's also a lot of teachers that stay that just become incredibly burnt out. You know, within 10 or 15 years. And the other piece that I will say, you know, as we look at the Black Lives Matter movement and the fight against systemic racism that we see in society, we also have a huge problem that there is a large population of teachers or of students in the United States and also abroad that do not see themselves reflected in their teachers. And so the message that's being sent to them is that, you know, you don't matter as much as other groups. And so I think we need to really focus on representation in our teaching force as much as we need to focus on changing the system to support teachers that want to do the right thing.
And you said we need to also start to stand up for ourselves and say, you know, this is not right. What we're doing is wrong. And you are doing that. You have gone to Washington and you have called them out, haven't you? And I'm so darn proud of you. Tell us a little bit about that. And you still are.
Yeah, absolutely. With, you know, as I've been recognized, you know, in different ways with different awards that I've won, and I've had more and more of a platform, I've also felt an incredible responsibility to use that platform to advocate for what I know is right. And so in the political space, I have not been shy about having meetings with legislators and doing that individually. But also, I am the vice president of a nonprofit organization, the Pennsylvania Teachers Advisory Committee, which our entire purpose is to elevate the voices of teachers into spaces. We don't, as an organization, we don't take political positions. But what we do is we make sure that teachers have the opportunity to connect with those who are making decisions, so that they can speak for what's right, and they have a space to shape the system in a way that is better for kids.
Now, is that an organization just for Pennsylvania teachers, or yeah?
It is just for Pennsylvania teachers, and our reason for that is that here in the United States, education is largely a local issue, and so you have much more impact on what education looks like for students if you make changes at the state level than you do the national level. The federal Department of Education certainly has a role to play, and there are equity issues and issues that need to be discussed. And certainly everyone knows who Betsy DeVos is and has their opinions about her. But the reality is that the changes we make in our individual states are going to impact students more than changes we make at the federal level.
So how do we allow other countries to be able to take on that same ability?
That is a fantastic question. So one of the things that we've been working on within our Global Teacher Prize Alumni Association is starting to step in those spaces and give teachers a voice, not just within our community, but also for each of us to take back to our countries and say, how can we create a kind of system where teachers have agency to be able to speak for what they know is best for kids within those individual systems. And so I'm really excited about the work that the Global Teacher Prize alumni are starting to do in their home countries, and starting to, and through the network, learning from each other. Hey, this worked in Romania. What if we put it in place in Brazil, right? That's really when change starts to accelerate exponentially, is when we build those kinds of networks across cultures, across nations.
Yeah, because when I was last in India, I met with a number of educators and people who were really interested in trying to start sort of a matrix flow there. But in the end, it didn't happen. And it didn't happen because they were scared.
Yep.
And the statement was, education is not for learning in India. It is to make money.
Right.
I mean, that was a blunt statement. I said, what do you mean to make money? I said, because if the students don't pass up to the level of expectation of the state, they retain them and therefore make more money on them through keeping them in school and through after school tuition.
Yeah.
And so what do you do with that?
Yeah, so I think there is, those of us who are trying to do this work are definitely swimming upstream, to put it metaphorically. And so there is that current that is constantly pushing you back and telling you that, like, this work is too hard. So there is that aspect, and people are gonna, even with a ton of support, they're gonna get burnt out by doing this work, and we have to give them time to refresh, because it's just, it is, you are just trying to push a boulder up a hill. But the other, to address the other piece of the how we fight against that purely economic mode of schooling that seems to be so prevalent in different countries. I wouldn't agree. I wouldn't say that education and learning are synonymous. I wouldn't want to define education that narrowly for the reasons we talked about before. Learning is about knowledge and about about curriculum and content, but those values that we talked about, and interactions and holistic well-being, like those are education, right? When we incorporate those along with the learning. And I think economic considerations are part of that, right? But they're just one piece. And so when we're doing this kind of work and advocating, it's of course important to talk about the system. It's important to talk with data and with numbers because people understand that. But we have to humanize it. We have to tell narratives. We have to tell stories that connect with people emotionally. Because as a teacher, I will tell you, neuroscience tells us that's how people learn. Yeah. And so if you're talking to a policymaker, if you're talking to someone who's influential and has control over the system in some way, you need to get them to understand the story of Ishmael or whoever that you have to humanize it for them. And then once you've got them hooked in emotionally, now you can talk about the data. Now you can talk about the system. But you have to tell those stories that connect first, and then we can start doing the work of changing minds and changing policy.
Well, I've always been on board. We've always been on board together, swimming our boats upstream. And it's nice to see that at least they're making a little bit of progress. We actually have some people now who have joined us. And so I'm going to ask them if they have any questions that they might want to ask you. Because we've been talking now for half an hour. So if
then I have to run. So sure, I'm happy to take some questions. Yeah.
So if anybody in our audience that's in here would like an opportunity to ask Michael a question, if you just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Or you can unmute yourself. Nigel?
Hello there. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes,
I can.
Nigel, we can hear you. Well, we could hear you. You muted yourself. There. Nigel? There.
I apologize for being a little bit late, so I missed some of that, but I don't have a question at the moment, I'm afraid. I'm happy to follow someone else and ask a question in a moment.
Okay. Or if you'd like to type a question in, that would be great. You can watch that too. I know
So
you.
Tracy, while we're waiting for a question to come in, I'm gonna take a second and pitch the book that I currently have in production, because
Yes. Okay.
it really talks about holistically all of the things that we just discussed today, but it really looks at them from a U.S. centric view and how we can change the U.S. education system to make sure that it balances those three things that we talked about. And the great part about it is it's not written by me. I have one of 22 chapters in there, but it really pulls together some of the leading teachers in the United States, people who have been recognized for teaching excellence, along with international education researchers, to each give their own take on what the system needs to look like in order to be able to accomplish this. So flip the system. Now
that's the U.S. system, but we've already discussed the fact that it really isn't just the U.S. system, is it? So
correct. No, I think that those reading the book are going to find a lot that you can apply to your own context. But here in the United States, because of the inequities that I was explaining before, we have some of our own unique situations. And so it really takes and looks at it from that point of view, but it's applicable to any system.
That's wonderful.
That's the book with different authors. Yeah, that's a new book, or that's been out for a little while? Because I looked at one of the books you had.
It's no, this is a new book that is available for pre-order right now. It'll be available in physical copy in October. Flip the System US, How Teachers Can Transform Education and Save Democracy.
Okay, cool. What's I'm sorry, I did miss what you were saying, but if you could encapsulate, what's the biggest single thing that you would like to see that you think we should do that will make the difference? I mean, you'd say flipping the system. I understand a little bit about flipping education, but
so there's this is not a book about flipping education in the classroom. So this is not about watching videos and then having kids do work and changing that. This is really about flattening the hierarchy to make sure that that education is not a top-down system where those in the national government are dictating to regions and regions are dictating to administrators. Administrators dictate to teachers, and then we as teachers dictate to kids what they should be doing, right? It's really flattening that hierarchy to make sure that all of us are seeing each other as partners in learning, and that the system is driven by the collective voice of educators who understand the needs of children themselves having voice and agency and autonomy in their own classrooms, being able to use their passion to drive the system. So it's really about flattening that hierarchy.
Yeah. Okay, no, I was living with a teacher for quite a long time in the UK, and it frustrated me to see her being driven by the system, whereas her passion as a teacher and her skills as a teacher were being suborned by people in ivory towers who were a long way removed. So it should be upended, perhaps, because they're in close contact with the kids and understand what's going on. And I had a learning experience where I was teaching English to two kids, a 4-year-old and his brother, and basically I told the 4-year-old and the 2-year-old said, what you say, and learnt from the 4-year-old. And therefore having people who are years and years and years removed from the age of the kids that they're teaching, I was just assisted to remove 35 gigabytes of photos from my phone by my 11-year-old bonus daughter, and she did it far quicker than I could. So to try and teach these people something is frankly amusing at times. We should be learning from them more.
Absolutely, I totally agree.
What can I do to support you?
Keep doing the work and keep telling those kinds of stories that you just told. So I was just explaining to Tracy, the more we use narrative to connect with those who are in influential positions, that is our entry point. So when we tell those kinds of stories and we tell them in an emotive way that connects with people emotionally, it opens the door to advocate for the kind of system that we know is necessary for our children and for our society to be healthy. So keep up the good work.
Austria is very interesting because I've been here for 20 years now, and people say that the education system is struggling, but I say some of it is, and some of it is absolutely brilliant, and there's pockets of world-class stuff going on, and supporting those to do more of what they're doing, and supporting the teachers in a system that they're struggling in is a good thing, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely agree. All right, Tracy, I have to run, unfortunately.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, nice talking with you.
I'm going to stop the live. And Michael, it's been a pleasure as always to be with you.